Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and a very warm welcome to this edition of Business Africa. I'm your host, Afolake Oyiloye. The top stories this week. Africa's recent political turmoil marked by coups raises concerns about its impact on trade. On today's edition, experts' insight uncovers strategies to mitigate the effect on the continent's trade and supply chains. In western Cameroon's Chang, Donas Nduri, a young agronomist, is revolutionizing strawberry farming by cultivating organic strawberries, challenging a number of importing these delicate fruits in the region. In the Republic of Congo, the weight of escalating taxation continues to bear down on businesses, persisting despite government promises to enhance business environment. In a world where intricate supply chains power the global economy, political instability can spell far-reaching consequences. Africa in particular has seen a surge in political upheaval from coups to conflict, sparking worries about the impact on trade and supply chains. In this story, we gather insight from experts to explore strategies that address the adverse effects of political instability on African trade and supply chains.
Africa's recent surge in political instability, marked by coups and conflicts, has raised concerns about its impact on regional trade and supply chains. The African Union and the Economic Community of West African States employ strategies such as suspending member states with coups. International sanctions on coup-affected nations lead to border closures, especially impacting landlocked countries reliant on neighbours for trade. The long-term consequences are dire, with instability deterring international investments, hindering economic transformation and jeopardizing global production of critical minerals found in Africa.
Whenever there's a coup, it really goes against the rule of law, and it is, incredibly destabilizing. So it creates conditions that are not conducive to business. And after many of these coups, we see kind of the transition periods go for years and years and years. So it's not, rarely a short-term fix after, after a coup. So there's long-term consequences.
In the wake of political instability, the repercussions extend far beyond just governmental affairs.
You've had a suspension of international funding for development purposes. And in a country such as Niger, for example, 40% of the national budget is actually funded by external development finance. So that's a massive disruption going forward. The companies that are operating in these countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, have seen companies being forced to suspend their operations. And the French-owned uranium producer in the north of Niger has actually been forced to suspend its operations because it has not been able to import, because of sanctions, the chemicals that it needs.
Political instability in Africa presents a significant threat to regional trade and supply chains. The adverse consequences extend to both African nations and the global economy.
Martin Luther Munu is an African trade specialist. He joins us for more on that story. Thanks for joining us. Now, to start off with, the recent coups we've had in Africa, what are some of the potential long-term consequences on trade and supply chains in these affected regions?
The long-term consequences can be actually devastating for these African countries because it takes time to build resilient supply chains, and trade partners may search for more reliable partners, especially where they can get these resources. But of course, this brings in the need for political stability in these countries, because political stability is one of the most important aspects that investors and companies look into. But we should also know that some of these resources and the supply chains that have been built over the years makes it easier and cheaper for these companies to source these products from African countries. So if it can be addressed earlier in terms of negotiation, then this long-term consequence can be averted.
Now, what strategies and measures can international organizations and African nations implement to mitigate the negative effect of this political turmoils?
We need to promote trade for peace. We have seen that if countries rely on each other through supply chains, and linking production and production areas to industries and distribution, the there is likelihood to be more peace and stability. We need to invest in peace building and meaningful negotiations, like I said, to ensure that the various concerns of the various political actors are comprehensively addressed. And lastly, we need to improve governance and accountability structures.
Now, can you share insight of the economic and trade consequences of this event on the global economy?
I see the long-term potential effects of this as more disruptive to African countries. Many of the African countries, they are limitedly integrated in the global value chains. So much as we see instabilities that can shock the world, the overall contribution of African countries to global trade is minimal. And so which means any instability is likely to disproportionately affect African countries. However, critical minerals for developed countries, the supply of these critical minerals would be heavily affected. Global production basically relies a lot on the supply of these critical minerals. If we see innovations, for instance, in the digital economy, and we see increased need for the energy transition, so this is likely to be disrupted because these African countries, much as they don't benefit to the extent that they should have, still they supply these products to developed countries, and the disruption in the supply of these products is likely to have that wide implication.
Mr. Monu, thanks so much for your time. In the lush surroundings of Chang, Western Cameroon, a tale of agricultural ingenuity unfolds. Donas Nduri, a young agronomist, has embarked on a mission to cultivate organic strawberries in a region where these delicate fruits are typically imported. With unwavering determination and innovative techniques, Dioril is rewriting the narrative of strawberry farming in Africa.
3 years ago, Anafak Donasin Dioril, a young agricultural engineer from Jank in Western Cameroon, founded a startup whose main activity is strawberry production. In Cameroon, most strawberries are imported from Europe or South Africa. But Dioril has set himself the challenge of producing organic strawberries without chemical inputs. I am passionate about this crop because the West made us believe that it couldn't grow in Africa. And through the experiments I undertook in 2020, I was able to demystify this crop and prove to the world that it is possible to grow strawberries in Africa today. Production is still subject to devastating diseases and climatic variations. Dioril plans to increase production by adopting greenhouse cultivation. For marketing, Dioril delivers directly to supermarkets to avoid intermediaries. Demand outstrips supply, and the people of Jank don't hesitate to come back to stock up at the nursery. He's still producing locally. Imagine if he had orders for tons. In fact, the government needs to see how it can support him so that it can satisfy his customers. Finding financing to expand the farm and producing enough to satisfy customers are the major challenges that the young agricultural startup has set itself for the coming years.
In the Republic of Congo, excessive taxation continues to plague businesses despite government attempts to improve the business environment. This tax burden has forced some entrepreneurs to close shops while others operate informally. We delve into the challenges posed by these high taxes and efforts to address them in this report.
Tax pressures persist in the Republic of Congo despite government measures aimed at improving the business climate. As a result, some entrepreneurs are forced to close shop while others choose to return to the informal sector. Such is the case of this entrepreneur who chose to speak to us anonymously. There is a Chamber of Commerce asking us to pay a sum of 50,000 francs for their assistance, but they never helped. Personally, this has even prompted me to leave my first location for somewhere else. The same cry of alarm resonates from this diaspora entrepreneur, forced to close his SME in less than a year before packing his bags. The kicker is when we received a letter from the tax authorities on July 16th inviting us to pay the property tax straight away or they close the business. The real estate tax is due for the 2020 to 2021 fiscal year. Since we were in financial distress, we were trying to find solutions. It was a bit of a crushing blow, so we decided to close shop. In 2021, the country had one of the highest tax burdens in sub-Saharan Africa at around 31.10%, according to a survey by the Anglo-Dutch firm KPMG. Since then, the government has announced tax relief measures in its 2022 to 2026 National Development Programme, but the reality on the ground is quite different, with tax inspections multiplying. To overcome this tax asphyxia, the Business Owners Union of Congo intends to take action in conjunction with the government with a view of revising the investment charter, as well as publishing a white paper on the current state of taxation in the Republic of Congo.
And that's all we had for you this week on Business Africa. Thanks for joining us. For more business news and stories, stay tuned to Africa News and Africanews.com.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.